Welcome to Deal Dialogue.
Hello and welcome to Deal Dialogue, a discussion on all things related to M&A and financing. I'm Rob Hickey with RBC Mid-Market M&A. Today we are going to discuss networking and more specifically building your network. One of the ways the professionals in the M&A and financing industry connect is through business associations. These groups hold networking events, seminars, and conferences and provide a great way to connect. There are a number of these across Canada and the United States, including boards of trade, financing, and M&A associations. Today, we have Mike Fenton, who is the chapter president and CEO of one such group, the Association for Corporate Growth, or ACG. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rob.
Mike, before we get started, can we talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've spent about half my career in the private sector and then the last 18 years or so, probably the back half of my career, in the not-for-profit sector. So management roles, working with national charitable organizations, worked with a hospital foundation and fundraising role, International Economic Development Association, and for the last almost 5 years with ACG.
Well, it sounds like you've done quite a lot of networking in your career, which suits you well for the role. Can you tell us a little bit about the ACG? And I should say, for the benefit of everyone, that I am a long-standing member of the ACG and I'm on the board of the ACG. This is really a discussion about networking in general. I think the ACG is a great organization. It's not the only one, but we're keen to learn more about the ACG, Mike.
Yeah, and I think, for people working in the M&A private equity industry, particularly in the mid-market sector, ACG is really the oldest and longest running business-to-business association in North America. We've been around since the mid to late 60s. We have about 15,000 members worldwide, 59 chapters, cities around the world. The strength is really in North America, 47 cities in the U.S. and 4 in Canada. And as you mentioned, I head up the Toronto chapter, which is the oldest and largest international chapter outside of the U.S.
What are the other chapters in Canada?
Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. And interestingly, from a timing standpoint, I just got back from our chapter leader meetings in Florida earlier this week, and there's talk about the development of a chapter in Quebec, which would be great as an addition because it's been a gap in our marketplace, and I think we're going to get to it later in the podcast. But we also launched a new event in Ottawa last week, which was very successful.
Well, you're the president and CEO of the Toronto chapter, so can you tell us a little bit about that chapter?
Sure. So ACG started in the U.S. Not surprisingly, New York and Chicago were the first two cities where, the deal market started, and they were asked back in the early 70s to develop a chapter here in Toronto. And for many, many years, it was kind of a lunch club for, people, predominantly men who worked in the business on Bay Street. And it's evolved now to be a fully diverse ecosystem of capital providers and service providers. We like to think of ourselves as, if you're in the mid-market, if you're doing deals, anywhere from sort of $10 to $500 million, that's, we're the ecosystem where you're going to find deals and you're going to make those connections. So as an association, we do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, we're really there to put people together to do business deals. And, despite technology, you still have to work face-to-face and build relationships, and that's really what we're good at.
How many members in Toronto?
We're continuing to grow. We're close to 400 right now, but our network, as I say, in terms of our touch points, probably touch about 3,000 executives, companies across North America. And we really are in a very unique position in ACG, being the representative for Bay Street in Canada. I like to say we sort of have 3 levels that we play in. One would certainly be on a regional basis, so, Toronto, GTA area, but because we haven't had a chapter east of us, and our closest other 3 chapters are in Western Canada, in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver, and they really, started in the last 15, 20 years. We've been around since 71. We're the de facto national chapter for Canada as well. So, from a business standpoint, we really consider ourselves to be the national chapter. So we play east-west, obviously, across Canada. And, when people are coming in either from the Maritimes, from Quebec, or from Western Canada, they'll use ACG as a touch point to meet and contact people. And more in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been really promoting cross-border. So, for those 47 chapters in the U.S., people really see us as, ACG Canada to some degree. And so if you're wanting to do business on Bay Street, again, a lot of our members in the U.S. chapters will come, work through us here in Toronto.
Speaking of members, can you talk a little bit about the professional backgrounds of the membership base?
Yeah, it's a senior level audience, director to C-level. We're reasonably well split between capital providers on one side. So, your group here at RBC would be a good example of that. We've got people who work in the M&A advisory side of the business, commercial finance, sponsor coverage. And then you've got investment banks from large to boutique, and the banks, the banks and advisory firms. And then on the service provider side, you'd have the top law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms, and then your sort of what I would call your specialty advisors, the valuation firms, executive recruiters, people of that nature.
You're listening to Deal Dialogue.
The backgrounds sound diverse. Why do people join the ACG?
I think people join for different reasons, and the reason I say that is because people join at different times in their careers. So if you think about the life cycle, the customer life cycle, when people join or make investments or start building a portfolio, if you're early in your career, so for instance, if you're at the associate level and looking to get established, we have a young professionals group for the under 40 crowd. That's become very, very successful, and it's been great for associates who are looking to build network, learn about business development skills, a bit of peer networking, and of course they'll have access to thought leadership and senior executives. And then our regular membership, which crosses over into that age group, which has really been the core of our membership for many years. I would say while people join for different reasons, at the end of the day, they're really joining because it's about making connections for business development. The other things we do obviously are, I think we're spending a lot more time here because that's what our members are asking for, is really around thought leadership, trends, research, what's new or what's coming down the pipe in terms of things that are going on in the industry, in terms of access to speakers. The social side, the networking side is certainly very important. And then you're a good example of this, Rob, for people who in the industry who have got into leadership positions who are interested in giving back, either sitting on a board or a committee or assisting with our young professionals group, running some of our events. That's another way to stay involved, get involved in the industry. So it's a nice, it's a pretty diverse ecosystem that's well targeted. And I would say the other thing about ACG that I think makes us quite different from all of the other industry associations, and we work with most of the others, TMA, FEI, CPA, CVCA, a variety of them. I think what makes ACG and continues to make ACG different is this, unique network of 47 chapters in the U.S. and 4 in Canada, so 51 and 90% of our membership. So it gives people a real nice access point when they're moving around.
You mentioned in your previous discourse that there were social activities and speakers. Can you talk a little bit from a overview perspective, the types of events and activities that the Toronto chapter puts on?
Sure. I think, if you know anything about ACG, you'd know about our national conference, which is Capital Connection. It's kind of the flagship brand for ACG, and virtually every chapter has an annual conference that would comprise, speakers, a trade show, probably a program called Deal Source, which ACG really has trademarked, which is putting private equity firms and investment banks together for pre-scheduled business development meetings. Every city is a little bit different. I think the one thing that in Toronto, we're now we just celebrated our 17th anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and that conference was the biggest ever. We had in excess of 700, executives from across North America. 20% come from the U.S., another 15% from outside of Ontario. So it's a pretty diverse group. And that is certainly the flagship brand. But the majority of what we do really are thought leadership and professional development focused events, breakfast seminars, lunch seminars. We do some, end of day cocktail receptions where people can meet in more of a social environment. But really, I would say where we've been moving towards in the last 3 to 4 years is we've doubled the number of programs we're doing, and we probably do close to 35 a year now. It's really been around thought leadership. People, because of the volume of content, because of social media, because of, hey, I'm busy, what they really want access to are industry leaders and influencers and content. And so while we're not a research-based organization, we will work with organizations like the Globe and Mail, the Conference Board of Canada, and others who can bring us content and research and what's new in the industry through seminars or online content.
How many events are you putting on a year?
We're up to about 35 now, and I think what we've been able to do in terms of diversifying the last few years is we've been reaching out. So as I said, we hosted an event conference in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, focused on the private equity sector, which rolled into connecting with some of the government agencies and public, private, and service providers in the National Capital Region. So that was great. We've done some work outside of Toronto. So for the last 4 years, we've partnered up with one of our ACG chapter members in the U.S. to focus on cross-border, NAFTA 2.0, that type of thing. We've done 2 seminars with our New York City chapter. We did one in Boston, and then earlier this year in spring of 2019, we did a 3-way partnership with the 2 chapters in Michigan, and we focused there on the cross-border trade between Canada and the U.S., as well as Ontario and Michigan, and cannabis, which had just become legalized in Michigan last year. So we're always reaching out, but we're trying to find common ground between, from a content standpoint. And so what we're finding now is that more and more of our U.S. colleagues who run ACG chapters are interested in partnering with us because their members are wanting to do more business in Canada.
And if you look at, you mentioned the Capital Connection. Why don't we talk about that for a second? That's the flagship event. Someone coming to a Capital Connection, what can they expect?
So we focus a lot on content, and I think it's interesting that a lot of the other Capital Connections focus more on the trade shows and the networking, the informal networking, which is great. Everyone wants to do that. We've really focused a lot on content, and I like to think that our value proposition as a national conference is built on the content and influencers. So this year, for instance, we had a full-day conference with 58 speakers and 14 presentations, including some interactive workshops. We had a trade show with about 60 of our, member companies involved. And then it was a 2-day event. So the day prior, we hosted the Deal Source event, which I mentioned, drew about 150 people. This was putting capital providers together with investment bankers and advisory firms.
How many private equity firms attended?
I think the number would be somewhere in the 30 to 40 range, and that's from all over the U.S. and Canada.
Right.
And so that's been growing. It's something we've been building over the last few years. What I found, though, is that the core of that event really is around the content and the speakers, and that's what people come for.
If you look at the events that happen during the year and whether they're flagship events or the seminars or social events, can you think of any specific examples of connections that stick in your mind that people have made?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been asking that question. The last month has been very busy with Capital Connection, our Ottawa event, and even I was in Florida early this week for these leadership meetings, and I was talking to a U.S. private equity firm who has started coming up, and I just said, how have you found it? And they said, you know what, we've made some great connections. My colleague who's from New York has been up for the last 2 years through 3 of our events, and has found deals in each of those events from people that we have not met before. So I think what you're finding is for the U.S. companies that are coming up are finding the market here not quite as competitive. Valuations aren't quite as high, and if they're prepared to invest in the market, they can find some good deals. But they have to invest, and they recognize that. More locally, I think our events do 2 things. One, because we rely so much on technology these days, it forces people to get together, which we probably don't do as much as we'd like to because we're all busy. But it forces people to get out and do the meet and greet and the handshake and hey, how are you? And I don't think you can discount that. And then the third thing is you're always going to meet somebody new. And like I said, we do 30 to 35 events. Nobody goes to all of our events, but there's enough of a diversity in terms of content, time of year, groups, that you're going to meet that are going to be different. So you'll always meet somebody new at one of our events, and I think that's what people like.
At any given event, let's say for someone who's not been to an ACG event, is not a member yet, maybe thinking about it, how tough is it for someone walking into an event to make connections?
I think for people who maybe aren't predisposed to going out and doing the networking or meeting people that they don't know, I think ACG provides a forum which is actually quite user-friendly. One, because we have a lot of volunteers who assist in opening doors. We identify people who are coming who are either new members or prospective new members who are there as guests, and we'll make an attempt to find out who it is they want to meet. I mean, it's part of our onboarding when we have people coming in. I often say that we're a member-based association, and at the end of the day, if members don't see the value, then we'll be out of business. So that may seem a little simplistic, but the reality is every time somebody comes to an event that's new, we try and identify them and find out why they're there and try and help them make a connection. Because if they don't make that connection, then they probably won't come back.
Right. If someone is thinking about membership, how would you articulate to them the value? I mean, I know we've talked a lot, but just to sum it up, why should someone consider an organization like the ACG?
I'd say a couple of reasons. One is your network can never be big enough.
Right.
As much as we like to believe, we all know a lot of people. Your network is never big enough. You can always meet new people. Two, I think the nature of the way ACG is set up, it's very collegial. I find when we make introductions, when someone's coming into town, even from out of town or another chapter, and they want to connect, ACG, if you say you're an ACG member, people are willing to meet you, whether it's through email or a phone or just, hey, somebody referred me, they will do that. I think the other thing is the nature of our events is people are expecting to meet, to talk about deals.
Right.
Like that's why they join. There's no preconceived notion about I may not want to talk. No, people do want to talk about deals, and all of the other stuff is above and beyond. It's the social stuff and the networking and referring people along. I think is just part of it. So I think it's it's been a very consistent ecosystem for many years. I think what's changed it is because of technology and how busy everyone is, getting out and not to say forcing yourself, but being able to calendar X number of events a year into your schedule to say, when I go to an ACG event, I know who I'm going to meet or the type of people I'm going to meet. I'm always going to meet somebody new. I'm going to see some familiar faces. I'm not going to have to pretend that I want to do business because people want to do business. Whereas in a lot of other industry associations, doing business might be seen to be maybe not, appropriate. But when you walk into the room, you can talk business straight up, or you can just go in for social reasons. So I think it's a very consistent and collegial atmosphere. And I think that works out really well, irrespective of whether it's an event that attracts sort of the senior people or whether it's our young professionals. I think it's very consistent that way.
How do people find out more about the Toronto chapter of the ACG?
Yeah, well, if you want to find out more about Toronto, it's acg.org, and you can find our chapter link on the global website. We have a staff team that's happy to answer questions. But if they want to reach me, it's mfenton@acg.org. I'll pick up the phone and talk to anybody about membership or opportunities, whether it's corporate or personal. But we have a very good website and has all of our information on there. The global website, has access to all of the chapters as well. So we also, a couple of things from a communication standpoint, we've just launched a weekly newsletter. Comes out every Thursday, has good content on our programs, our chapter programs, as well as some industry information. Anybody can sign up for that. They don't have to be a member. And for membership, we kind of look at that as just a point of entry. It's about $425 a year. That provides access to all of our events and preferred pricing on events, as well as usually half a dozen events that are invitation only for members. And then if you've got a team and you've got multiple members that you want to register, we have preferred pricing for that as well.
Okay. Well, Mike, look, this has been a very informative session on, I think, something that's important to everybody, which is building a network. Whether you're a banker, a lawyer, an accountant, an advisor, or a private equity investor, the events that the ACG puts on, similar to other industry associations, are ones which give you the opportunity to make those connections and learn what's going on in the market. So thanks again for coming in and talking to us today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
That's it for this segment of Deal Dialogue. Our guest was Mike Fenton. Our production engineer is Tarek Chami, and I'm Rob Hickey. Thanks for listening, and good luck with your deals. Deal Dialogue is a production of RBC Mid-Market M&A.